What if the person you are right now, the personality, the moods, the same recurring problems, isn't actually who you are, but just a habit you've repeated so many times your brain and body no longer know how to be anything else? Think about the last time you tried to change something real about yourself. Lose weight, stop the same fight with your partner, break the cycle of anxiety before a big meeting. You probably had willpower for a few days, maybe a few weeks, and then, almost like gravity, you slid right back into the same thoughts, the same reactions, the same version of you. It felt less like a failure of discipline, and more like your own body was pulling you back to a setting it already knew by heart. Here's the myth. Almost everyone believes that change comes from trying harder, thinking more positively, or waiting for our circumstances, our job, our relationship, our health, to improve first. Fix the outside, and the inside will follow. Joe Dispenza flips that completely. He's a former chiropractor turned researcher who studies neuroscience, epigenetics, and quantum physics, and who became known worldwide after appearing in the documentary, What the Bleep Do We Know? His own turning point came after a serious spinal injury doctors said would likely leave him unable to walk without surgery. Instead, he used nothing but focused mental rehearsal, visualizing his spine healing in precise detail, day after day, and walked again without ever going under the knife. That experience sent him on a decades-long search into how thought alone can change the body, a search that became his book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. Here's the central idea. Your personality creates your personal reality, and if you keep thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same feelings, and reacting the same way to your environment, you will keep manufacturing the same life. To change your life, you have to change your energy, which means becoming someone new before the evidence for that new life shows up around you. In this video, we'll walk through 9 lessons drawn from Dispenza's research on quantum physics, neuroscience, and meditation. We'll look at how your thoughts and feelings physically shape matter, why your body has secretly become your mind, why most of us are addicted to our own emotions without knowing it, and the exact 4-week meditation framework Dispenza teaches to install a new version of yourself. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. You are not as solid as you think. Most people walk through life assuming they're stuck being who they've always been, because the world around them, their body, their bank account, their relationships, all seems to confirm the same old story every single day. Reality feels fixed, and they feel like a passenger inside it. Quantum physicists discovered something that upends this completely. At the subatomic level, particles don't exist as fixed things until they're observed. Before observation, they exist only as waves of pure possibility, an infinite range of potential outcomes. The moment a conscious observer pays attention, one of those possibilities collapses into physical reality. In other words, your attention doesn't just witness reality, it helps create it. Researchers at the HeartMath Institute demonstrated something remarkable with this principle. When trained participants held a clear, focused intention to change a strand of DNA in a test tube while simultaneously feeling a genuine elevated emotion like gratitude or love, the DNA's shape measurably changed, in some cases by as much as 25%. When they used only the intention without the feeling, or only the feeling without the intention, nothing happened. Thought alone didn't move the needle. Feeling alone didn't either. It took both, aligning together. That's the real exercise here. Notice the difference between merely wanting something and holding a clear thought paired with a genuinely felt emotion, as if it's already true. The next time you set an intention for your day, don't just think it. Feel gratitude for it, as if it has already happened, before there is any external evidence that it has. You are not a fixed, solid thing waiting for the world to happen to you. You are an observer whose attention and feeling state are constantly shaping which version of reality shows up next. Chapter 2. The Habit of Being Yourself. Most people believe their personality is simply who they are, a fixed trait like eye color. In reality, your personality is built almost entirely from repetition, the same thoughts fired in the same order, tied to the same emotional reactions day after day, until your brain wires them into an automatic loop. You think you're choosing your reactions. Mostly, you're replaying them. Consider Nelson Mandela or Gandhi, both of whom held fast to a specific vision, freedom for their people, decades before there was any external evidence it would happen. They didn't wait for their environment to change first. Dispenza argues, this is the deeper skill, staying mentally committed to a future reality that hasn't shown up yet, independent of what your current circumstances are screaming at you. There's striking neuroscience behind why this works. In a classic study, one group of participants physically practiced a piano exercise for 2 hours a day for 5 days. A second group only mentally rehearsed the exact same finger movements, never touching a single key. Brain scans afterward showed both groups had grown nearly identical new neural circuits. The brain, it turns out, doesn't fully distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a physically lived one. Here's the exercise. Pick one specific way you want to think, act, or respond differently in a situation you know is coming: a hard conversation, a stressful meeting, a moment you usually react poorly to. Spend a few focused minutes each day mentally rehearsing yourself responding in a new way, in vivid detail, until the rehearsal itself starts to feel familiar. If you keep thinking the way you've always thought, you'll keep being who you've always been. Change the rehearsal, and eventually you change the performance. Chapter 3. When the body becomes the mind, most people assume their emotions are simple, honest reactions to what's happening around them right now. In reality, many of us are running on emotional residue from years, sometimes decades in the past, replaying old feelings like resentment, unworthiness, or anxiety so often that the body starts generating them on its own, with or without a present-day reason. Dispenza tells the story of Bill, a roofing contractor whose melanoma kept recurring despite multiple rounds of treatment. During a period of self-reflection, Bill realized he'd spent 30 years marinating in quiet resentment, having given up his dream of being a musician to take over the family business. He'd repeated that bitterness so often, it had become an unconscious automatic program running his body. During 2 weeks of deliberate solitude, he consciously caught himself every time that old resentment arose and refused to feed it, replacing it instead with a new way of responding to his family. Shortly afterward, his remaining tumor fell off. He has remained cancer-free since. This connects directly to a field called epigenetics. Contrary to older beliefs, most disease isn't caused by fixed, unchangeable genes. The vast majority is linked to lifestyle, chronic stress, and environmental signals. Genes are more like a library that different chapters get activated or silenced by our internal chemical environment, and that environment is shaped heavily by our repeated emotional states. The exercise for 1 week: notice which emotion you return to most automatically when nothing in particular is happening. The emotional default setting your body drifts back to in idle moments. Simply naming it honestly is the first step to no longer running it unconsciously. Feelings aren't wrong, but when the same one runs on autopilot for years, your body isn't reacting to your life anymore. It's reenacting your past. Chapter 4. Living in the past, you call your future. Most people believe they're living in the present moment, making fresh choices day to day. In reality, most of us predict our future almost entirely from memories of our past, expecting the same disappointing boss, the same argument, the same body aches, because that's the pattern our brain and body have memorized. We call it realistic. It's actually just rehearsal of what's already familiar. Dispenza points out that true change requires living emotionally in your desired future before it has any physical evidence of arriving, giving thanks for a health outcome, a relationship, or an opportunity as though it has already happened. This isn't wishful thinking, it's a discipline. Most people only feel grateful once something good has already occurred, which keeps them permanently one step behind their own life, always reacting instead of creating. The exercise, drawn straight from the book, is a version of gratitude done in advance. Each day, spend a few minutes feeling genuine appreciation for something you want, as though it is already unfolded, rather than waiting for outside proof first. The body doesn't fully distinguish between something felt vividly in the mind and something happening physically around you. Either way, it updates its chemistry to match the feeling. If you keep predicting your future from your past, you'll keep manufacturing the same life on repeat. Feel the future you want now, and your body starts preparing for it before your circumstances do. Chapter 5. Survival Mode versus Creation Mode. Most people, without realizing it, spend the majority of each day in what Dispenza calls survival mode, scanning for problems, reacting to stress, defending an identity built on being right, being wronged, or being busy. It feels productive. It's actually a state almost entirely dedicated to keeping the familiar you intact and protected. Creation mode looks completely different. Think about the last time you were fully absorbed in something you loved, a hobby, a piece of music, a project, so much that you lost track of time entirely and forgot to check your phone. In that state, Dispenza notes, you're not defending an identity. You're not thinking about your possessions, your reputation, or your problems. You're, in his words, living as a nobody. And paradoxically, that's when the brain's frontal lobe, the seat of imagination and possibility, is most active, most capable of generating something genuinely new. The shift between these two states happens automatically the moment stress hormones flood the body. Under chronic stress, blood and energy divert away from the creative, future-oriented frontal lobe and toward the primitive, reactive parts of the brain built purely for defense. You cannot meaningfully create and defend at the same time. The body only has resources for one. The exercise: notice honestly how much of today was spent defending your identity, your opinions, your routines, versus how much was spent genuinely absorbed in creating something. Even 10 unguarded minutes a day of full absorption in something you love begins retraining the brain toward creation instead of defense. You cannot build a new life from the same state of mind that's busy guarding the old one. Chapter 6. 3 brains. Thinking, doing, being. Most people think learning something new is a single event. You understand a concept, and that's that. But Dispenza breaks real change into 3 distinct stages that involve 3 different parts of the brain, and skipping any of them is why so many insights never turn into lasting change. The first stage is thinking, handled by the neocortex, where you gather new knowledge, an idea, a fact, a new way of seeing a situation. Most self-help stops right here, which is why so much of it doesn't stick. The second stage is doing, involving the limbic brain, where you actually apply that knowledge through a new experience, generating new emotions in the process, since emotion is what tells the brain, this mattered. Remember it. The third and final stage is being, governed by the cerebellum, where a behavior has been repeated so many times, it no longer requires conscious thought at all. It has become who you are, automatically, the same way driving a car eventually becomes unconscious. Most failed attempts at change stall out at stage 1. Someone reads a great insight, feels briefly inspired, and never lives it long enough to generate the repeated emotional experience needed to move it into automatic being. The exercise: take one insight you've genuinely believed for a while but never fully lived out, and this week, deliberately create 3 or 4 real situations to physically practice it. Not just think about it. Only lived repetition moves a thought from an idea in your head into a trait embedded in your body. Knowledge that never becomes practiced experience isn't wisdom. It's just trivia waiting to be forgotten. Chapter 7. The gap. Most people assume that if their external life looks good, packed schedule, admiring colleagues, a full calendar of accomplishments. They must be doing fine internally too. Dispenza admits he believed exactly that about himself, at a point when he was lecturing to thousands of people worldwide and had appeared in a hit documentary, yet felt strangely empty the moment the applause and travel stopped. Sitting quietly one day, he realized his entire sense of happiness had become dependent on external validation, the crowds, the travel, the recognition. When none of that was present, he didn't know who he was. He pictured this as a literal gap between two hands, one representing the self he showed the world, performing, competent, always fine, and the other representing the self he actually felt like in private, uncertain and searching. The wider that gap grows, the more exhausting it becomes to maintain, and the less connected you feel to your own life, even when it looks successful from the outside. Closing this gap isn't about becoming less successful. It's about no longer needing an audience, an achievement, or anyone else's approval to access your own sense of okayness. The exercise for one day: notice every moment you perform a version of yourself for someone else's benefit, saying, "You're fine" when you're not, projecting confidence you don't feel. You're not trying to stop doing this overnight. You're simply building awareness of how wide your own gap has become. The most exhausting habit isn't the bad ones you already know about. It's the daily habit of being someone you have to keep performing. Chapter 8. Training your brainwaves toward change. Most people think meditation is either mystical nonsense or an escape from real life. Dispenza treats it as neither. He treats it as a measurable, trainable shift in brainwave activity that determines whether you're capable of accessing genuine change at all. Our normal waking state runs mostly on beta waves, the frequency associated with analytical thinking, stress, and constant engagement with the external environment through the five senses. It's useful for navigating daily life, but it's also the state in which old familiar programs run most automatically, since beta keeps you locked onto the external world that triggers those habitual reactions in the first place. To access real change, the brain needs to slow down into alpha, and eventually, theta states associated with relaxed, internally focused awareness, the same territory the brain enters naturally right before falling asleep and right after waking. This matters because the subconscious mind, where the vast majority of our habitual programs actually live, is far more accessible in these slower states. Trying to force change through pure willpower while stuck in busy analytical beta is like trying to reprogram a computer while it's still running a dozen other applications at full speed. The exercise, straight from the book: each morning or evening in a quiet space with your eyes closed, spend 20 minutes simply noticing the physical sensations of your body, starting at the top of your head and slowly moving downward, part by part. This alone, done consistently, begins shifting your brain waves out of beta and into the calmer states where real reprogramming becomes possible. You cannot out-willpower a habit that lives below conscious thought. You have to meet it in the state where it actually operates. Chapter 9. The 4-week practice for becoming someone new. Most people, once they finally understand all of this intellectually, still don't know what to actually do with it day to day. Dispenza closes the book with a structured weekly meditation practice designed to turn every concept in this video into embodied change. In week 1, the sole focus is what he calls induction learning, to slow the brain from busy beta into calm alpha, often by mentally scanning the body part by part, simply noticing and sensing each area rather than thinking about anything at all. In week 2, once that calm state is accessible, the work becomes recognizing an old, unwanted emotional pattern, honestly admitting it exists, rather than masking it, consciously declaring the specific new way you intend to think and feel instead, and then surrendering the outcome, rather than gripping it with anxious effort. In week 3, attention turns toward interrupting the specific habitual thoughts tied to your old identity the moment you notice them arising, redirecting that mental energy toward the person you're choosing to become instead. And in week 4, the practice shifts fully into creation, vividly imagining and rehearsing the new version of yourself in as much sensory and emotional detail as possible. So the brain and body begin to treat that imagined future as genuinely familiar. The final piece, which Dispenza calls demonstrating, is simple to describe and hard to live, carrying that same elevated internal state out of meditation and into the ordinary hours of your actual day, at your job, with your family, in traffic, so your outside life gradually starts to match the internal state you've been rehearsing. The exercise for this week: commit to just the first step, 20 minutes of quiet body awareness meditation once a day for 7 days, before adding anything else on top of it. You don't need the whole 4-week program memorized to begin. You just need to sit down tomorrow morning and start with step 1. This book asks you to make one core shift. Stop waiting for your circumstances to change before you feel differently, and start deliberately changing your internal state first, trusting that your outer life will eventually reorganize itself to match it. None of this means change happens instantly or without effort. Old emotional patterns don't dissolve after one meditation, and the pull back toward familiar thoughts and reactions is real and often uncomfortable. What shifts is your relationship to that discomfort. It stops being proof that nothing is working and starts being exactly what it should feel like: an old, well-worn neural pathway losing its grip while a new one is still being built. Let's run through the toolkit one more time. Pair a clear thought with a genuinely felt emotion, since thought or feeling alone rarely moves anything. Mentally rehearse the response you want in vivid detail before the real moment arrives. Notice your emotional default setting, the feeling your body drifts back to when nothing is happening. Practice gratitude for what you want as though it has already happened, instead of waiting for proof first. Spend a few unguarded minutes each day fully absorbed in creating something, not defending your identity. Or insight into lived repetition, not just an idea you agreed with. Once, notice the gap between the self you perform and the self you actually feel like, and start with 20 minutes of quiet body awareness meditation before anything more complicated. That's the whole book, distilled into a practice you can actually begin tomorrow morning. If this summary gave you something worth sitting with, hit subscribe here on The Mind Master, because we break down one book like this every single week. But don't just watch it and move on. Sit quietly for a few minutes today. Notice which old familiar feeling your mind keeps returning to, and ask yourself honestly whether it's still serving you. Turn the theory into power.